Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are going to be talking about the Denver Broncos. So this is our second fantasy football video of the day. In this video I'm going to be going over the Denver Broncos fantasy football projections for the 2021 season. I'm doing that with every single team this offseason and going in alphabetical order. So if you're interested in stuff like this, please let me know. I'm doing this series and I'm doing a fantasy football advice video series to try to help you win a championship. So I've done well in fantasy football in the past, and I'm trying to share some of my ideas of what has worked for me before. So yeah, let me know. I also do a lot of stuff on my channel. I make songs, I react to songs, etc. So check out the channel if you're interested in stuff like that. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and, by the way, if you could guess the name of the song that I started out with this video with, then I will answer one of your fantasy football questions and mention you on this channel. So yeah, so keep that in mind, especially while I don't have a lot of subscribers right now. So let's go to the Denver Broncos, and let's start with their schedule. I've been starting off with every team's schedule and giving you a general outlook of how you should approach these players based on the defensive matchups that they've got as the season goes along. And the Denver Broncos, in particular, they have a very light start to the season, a difficult middle of the season, but then when it gets to the fantasy football playoffs, that's when you want to buy low because they've got a lot of great matchups leading up to the playoffs that will really help you with this team. So, first of all, week one, they've got the New York Giants, which is a good defense, I give you that. Not highly explosive or anything, but it's a decent matchup for them to work with. But then the next 2 weeks is especially good for them. They've got the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is one of the worst defenses in the league, and was probably the worst defense in the league last year. And then you got the New York Jets, which also projects to be a very bad defense as well. So week 2 to week 3, very good matchups that it's worth having them in week 1 as well leading up to that. So the first 3 weeks of the season, expect very good numbers for the Denver Broncos players, provided that their offense actually gives them that if Drew Lock is playing competently. But then it gets more difficult for them. So then they've got the Baltimore Ravens week 4, the Pittsburgh Steelers week 5, and they play the Raiders, good matchup. But then they've got the Browns, the Washington football team, and it's basically that middle stretch of the season is more difficult for them. So it's the best time to try to sell on the Broncos is after week 3, after they played the Jags and the Jets, and then you can really try to flip them for some value. But then you want to try to buy low you want to try to buy low on them after you've sold them, for example, after their bye week in week 12, because week 12 they've got a little bit possibly a difficult matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. I project they'll have an improved defense, but then the next couple weeks, they've got an excellent schedule. So they've got the Kansas City Chiefs in week 13. Could be a high-scoring game. Chiefs defense has kind of been up and down in the past, been a little improved, but potential is there for a lot of scoring and garbage time points. And then they've got some not good defenses. The Lions in week 14. Then they've got the Cincinnati Bengals in week 15, which is a team that runs the Civ defense. And then you've got another team that runs the Civ defense in the Las Vegas Raiders. So in week 15, 16, to start off your fantasy football playoffs, you've got 2 of the worst defenses in the league. Granted, in the championship week, it's a little more difficult. They've got the Chargers. I think the Chargers will be a better defense. But if you could start off with a schedule in fantasy football playoffs of Bengals and Raiders, the Broncos are going to be significant assets potentially to help you get to your championship game in fantasy football. So keep that in mind. Then the key takeaways is sell high after week 3, buy low after week 11, week 12. So let's go to the quarterback position now for Denver. So currently Denver has Drew Lock on the team, and if you keep in mind, if you remember, Teddy Bridgewater was traded to Denver after his future kind of fell out of favor when they took Sam Darnold. So, to me personally, so they have Drew Lock as the number 1 quarterback, but to me personally, I would much rather have Teddy Bridgewater as a starting quarterback than Drew Lock. I think Teddy Bridgewater was hosed in Carolina. I thought that was totally not fair. I think Bridgewater has arguably been just as, if not more, productive throughout his career than Sam Darnold. But it's kind of the way it goes. You go with the guys that have more potential and room to improve. Teddy Bridgewater is kind of locked in as a guy he's probably not going to have a very high ceiling, but he's going to give you mid-level quarterback production that will be effective. But when you're comparing him against a guy like Drew Lock, who last year was very erratic at times, had some good games, but he also had some games where he threw multiple interceptions. I would much rather have a guy like Bridgewater, who you know is not going to be turnover prone, a guy who can manage a team. I would personally rather have him as a starting quarterback than Drew Lock. So we'll see how that goes. There's also a lot of rumors that Aaron Rodgers could be traded here, which I'm not going to make any assumptions about that at this time because he's still on the Packers as of now. But if for some reason that were to happen, that would significantly improve all these players' numbers, or at least the skill position players. Just saying that as well. But unless Aaron Rodgers goes here, I'm not particularly high on drafting any quarterbacks for the Denver Broncos. I think Teddy Bridgewater, I would consider having him as stream value at certain points of the season. But even Drew Lock going up against his first couple week matchups against Jacksonville and New York, I'm not entirely confident that he would even have great game. Like he might be incredibly turnover prone. So it's worth monitoring this quarterback room to see what happens and who becomes the starter. But they could have stream value here and there, these two guys, but I'm not really considering either of them for fantasy football purposes, unless anything drastic happens that's unexpected. I mostly would just consider these guys as waiver wire options only. Running backs. So a little more interesting here. So Melvin Gordon is their number one running back, and he was decent for them at times. He had 986 rushing yards, so he was decent for them. He had 9 touchdowns. PPR, he was decent as well. He had 32 receptions, 158 yards. Not necessarily the way he's been in the past, but with Melvin Gordon, there's been a lot of up and down throughout his season last year. He had some very good games, notably against the New York Jets. He had 107 yards, 2 touchdowns on 23 carries. But then the week before that against Tampa Bay, he was 8 for 26, no touchdowns. I mean, that's kind of a little bit to be expected because of the defenses. The Tampa Bay front seven is elite. But then even as other games progress, against the Atlanta Falcons, which is a team that has historically not been a very good defense, they scored 27 points, but he only had 18 yards on 6 carries. That was not very good. He had some other very good games as well against the Kansas City Chiefs. He had 131 yards on just 15 carries. But then the week prior to that against New Orleans, he had 31 yards on 12 carries. So the point I'm making about him is that he's very up and down, and to me, he's clearly not the same player that he was when he was with the Chargers. So I think it's a little deceptive seeing some of his numbers because he was the number 14 running back in fantasy football last year, but he also played all of his games. There were a lot of elite running backs who were injured last year who didn't make it through the full season. So I think that's a little deceptive, and the fact that he's up and down, to me, I'm not super high on Melvin Gordon. I don't think he provides a ton of upside. And then he's also got another rookie coming in who's I'm going to talk about in a sec, who looks like he could take some of his touches away. So that all being said, I'm not looking to draft Melvin Gordon at all personally. So that rookie that I'm referring to is Javonte Williams. He is a second-round draft pick out of North Carolina. He is projected to be one of the better, more underrated running backs in the NFL draft from this season. So he is a guy that he's stepping into a position where he has a lot of potential to take some touches in the backfield, maybe even depending on how Melvin Gordon looks. Remember, he's 28, so he's kind of starting to get to that tail end of his career where he might be declining a little bit. Maybe Javonte Williams could be a surprise candidate who really kind of takes off as a rookie this year. So it's asking a lot because Melvin Gordon was productive enough last year that he still showed that he's worthy of being a number one running back. But Javonte Williams, he's a guy that is projected to be a good passing down running back. He's got explosive speed. So the Broncos like him so far in training camp. So it's possible this guy could really have a role, even with him being even with Melvin Gordon still getting the bulk of the carries. So all that being said, this is an excellent running back value to take late rounds of draft. I think a lot of people are not super aware of who he is right now. He provides a ton of upside as somebody that is stepping into a position where they do need an elite running back. Melvin Gordon may not necessarily be that guy for them, so maybe Javonte Williams could be the one to kind of fill that void, step in as an elite running back for them as the season goes on. So very high on taking him in the draft, and it'd be interesting to see where he falls, but I'm definitely going to be monitoring his situation, trying to get him on my team. Other running backs, Royce Freeman. I thought Royce Freeman was going to have potential to be that guy for the Broncos, but he lost his running back job to Phillip Lindsay, who's now on the Texans. And honestly, Royce has never really been in a situation where he's shown that he's capable of being a lead running back. So at this point, I'm not looking at him at all. He's merely third on the depth chart at this point. And then another guy is Mike Boone, who's been productive in the past with Minnesota. But I'm, again, not really looking at him either. I would only look at Freeman and Boone if in the event Gordon gets hurt. The potential some of them might take some of his carries away while Williams is still getting ready to adjust to the NFL. But other than that, I'm not really interested in them. Wide receivers. So a lot of this is they have got good receivers, but unfortunately their value is a little bit inhibited by the quarterback play. But two wide receivers in general that I want to talk about are Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. So a lot of people like Jerry Jeudy. They're very high on him. But again, he's another guy that you look at his stats from last year, he's incredibly up and down. So Jerry Jeudy, he's the guy that players are saying that is going to be the one that's really going to break out on them. But I actually believe it's going to be Courtland Sutton, and I'm going to kind of talk about that. But let's look at Judy's numbers last year. He had some excellent games. So against Atlanta, he had 14 targets, but he had 7 receptions for 125 yards and a touchdown. If you're getting 14 targets, then you're clearly a guy who has potential to be a focal point of an offense. So a lot of people are excited about that. Against the Chargers, second to last week of the season, he had 6 receptions for 61 yards, but he had 15 targets in that game as well. And then the last week of the season, he had 5 receptions, 140 yards, 1 touchdown. So, but then some other games this season, he's just totally been non-existent. So against the New Orleans Saints, he had no receptions on 1 target. And then the next week against Kansas City, he had 1 reception for 5 yards. That's supposed to be a very plus matchup for them going up against the Chiefs. And then the Buffalo Bills, a couple weeks later, he had 1 reception for 19 yards. So, I mean, these are the games against the teams that you're trying to bring out your best offense, and because you're going to have to play catch up with teams like the Bills and the Chiefs. And when he's only posting 1 reception in both those games, it's concerning about his ability to be a consistent option for them. I know he's a rookie and all that, but personally, I think that he's starting to get into that realm of people are hyping him up a little more than he's actually going to be a consistent player for you. I like receivers that are going to be more steady. I talked about this in the Dallas video that I just made and why I'm shying away from some of those players. But for Jerry Jeudy, I'm not necessarily as high on as I think some other people might be. But I am high on Courtland Sutton, and a lot of that is because I think people are forgetting about him. He did tear his ACL last year, so he's not necessarily at the forefront of people's minds when they think about the Denver receiving corps. But Courtland Sutton was very good for them in the past, especially in 2019. So he was very productive in 2019. He was top 10 to top 20 receiver improved as the season went along with Drew Lock. So I think there's an argument to be made that with Drew Lock as the starting quarterback, that these two have a great rapport together, and he could really kind of be the number one option for them. But then the other thing about Courtland Sutton is that he's more consistent too. He was generally a guy that they could rely upon in 2019, especially late in the season, to give them a ton of receptions and a lot of yards as well. So I'm personally more high on Courtland Sutton because of that, the relative draft position. I think you could get a guy like Courtland Sutton later in the draft who could have potentially be a number one receiver, and that's personally what I'm going to be looking at in terms of this Denver receiving core. Other guys, KJ Hamler is their third receiver who's been productive at times for them. He had 30 receptions, 381 yards, 3 touchdowns. But he kind of really only provides you like modest numbers at best, maybe in a stream matchup this first few weeks of the season, but otherwise I'm not really looking to draft him. DeSean Hamilton, same way. He's another guy that's been around in their system for a little while, but not necessarily done anything super productive. He had 23 receptions for 2 touchdowns. A rookie that they just drafted is Seth Williams from Auburn. So he is a guy to keep an eye on to maybe fill that third receiver role, especially in a scenario if they get like Aaron Rodgers or Deshaun Watson is also rumored to potentially go there. He could be a guy that gives you a lot of stream value or flyer value late in drafts as a guy who could step up into this void for a third receiver. But as of right now, I'm not really looking at him too much. But still, it's a good player to keep an eye on, especially in the preseason, and see how he does adjusting to an NFL offense. So tight ends. This is one of the tight ends that I'm highest on in this draft, and his name is Noah Fant. So Noah Fant has been, he's got a lot of potential. He's got a lot of rapport with Drew Lock. And last season, he unfortunately he played in quite a few games last year, but was battling injuries through a lot of it. But even in spite of that, he still put up 62 receptions on 93 targets. He had 3 touchdowns and 673 yards. So he's going to have volume for tight ends. And especially given the tight end landscape in the NFL being very unpredictable outside of the top 3 or 4 players, having a guy like Noah Fant who still finished number 12 last year in spite of various injuries. If you assume that the offense could improve, and especially if they get certain quarterbacks that I talked about earlier, there's a lot of value to be had with Noah Fant to be a breakout candidate this year. So I'm a big fan of him. I think he's going to be a decent value in the draft, that you can pick him up one of the mid picks in the draft as one of the later tight end or mid to later tight ends going off the board. I really like his value. I would definitely look at Noah Fant. He's a guy that I'm going to be looking at on my team. And then another guy of note, Albert Okwuegbunam, I think that's how you say his name. He was a rookie last year out of Missouri, and I bring that up because Drew Lock is from Missouri. He had some potential because he was a 4th-round draft pick, but unfortunately he tore his ACL after the 4th week. Didn't really get to put up very much numbers at all for the Broncos, but there's potential that he could be a tight end to keep an eye on if something were to happen to Fant injury-wise. He could be a reliable tight end for Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater, depending on who the starter is. But just keep that in mind. Broncos defense. So the defense has been historically good, and I think people still view them as an elite defense, but they just simply have not been as good in the recent years as they've been in the past. So their defense, that was not a top half defense last year, but it's probably going to be a defense that's drafted off of reputation and Von Miller. There's potential that improves now that he's healthy, but personally I'm not going to be reaching for this defense. I'm going to consider them as stream options early in the season, given some of those matchups that they have, but I'm not really looking at them as a reliable defense that I'm going to be drafting. And then their kicker, Brandon McManus, he is actually a kicker that I like. So he was number 11 a kicker last year, which is about reliable enough value to be a starting kicker for you. But he's a guy that is almost certainly going to be there in that last round of the fantasy football draft. And as I mentioned, you do not take kickers higher than that last round of the fantasy football draft. So I personally like Brandon McManus's prospects as a guy that you can rely upon as a kicker week to week, and it really doesn't cost you that much to just drop him if you need somebody else to pick up. I'm going to talk about that in a value as well. I've got a mind-blowing kicker strategy that I'm sure you will enjoy. I'm excited to talk about that, and I'm going to go through some more of these teams first. But yeah, that's all I got for the Broncos. Later this week, I'm going to be doing the Detroit Lions and talking about their fantasy football projections, and I'm going to continue to go through alphabetical order of all these teams. So, all right, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.